At my daughter's wedding, I reached for the chair that was meant for me. But before I could sit, her fiancé, Ryan, yanked it away with a cruel smile. My body hit the polished floor, pain shooting up my side. Laughter rippled through the guests, sharper than the impact itself. Then Ryan leaned down, his words cutting through the hall like a blade. "Stay down, old man. That's where you belong." Humiliation burned deep. But before I could rise, the groom's father entered, late to the ceremony. His eyes locked on mine. He stopped in his tracks, pale as a ghost, whispering words that froze the entire room. "Sir, is that really you?" Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and share your thoughts below. What would you do if your daughter's fiancé humiliated you in front of everyone at her wedding? Would you stay silent or fight back? The air was thick with the kind of tension that hides behind smiles and champagne glasses. I had been given a seat not at the head table, but tucked several rows back among distant relatives and acquaintances. Still, I accepted it. I was here for her, not for myself. The string quartet played lightly. The guests whispered behind their programs, and I kept my focus steady on the young woman in white. Emily looked radiant. Her dark hair pulled into a braid threaded with pearls, her mother's lace veil resting softly on her shoulders. For a moment, I felt pride that eclipsed everything else. But that moment ended when I tried to sit. The chair set aside for me had been drawn back slightly, as though placed in haste. I reached for it, steadying myself with a hand against the table. My back was not what it used to be, and every move required more effort than I cared to admit. Just as I bent my knees, her fiancé, Ryan, stepped in, his hand slick against the polished wood, and with one swift motion, he yanked the chair away. My body dropped without warning, and the fall cracked against the marble floor. The sound echoed in the hall, silencing even the violins. Pain shot through my hip and shoulder, sharp and immediate, but sharper still was the sting of humiliation. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then laughter burst from several tables, uneven and cruel. Not all joined in, but enough to burn. I could feel eyes on me, the pity of some, the mockery of others. Ryan stood above me, his smile thin, lips curled with triumph. He leaned just close enough for his words to strike, his voice pitched so those nearby could hear. "Stay down, old man. That is where you belong." My first instinct was to push myself up and throw the table over in rage. My hands clenched against the cold floor, every muscle burning for release. But years of struggle had taught me restraint. There are battles won by fists and others won by silence. So I remained on the floor longer than I needed, not out of weakness, but because I wanted the silence to expand, to make the cruelty visible for everyone in that hall. My eyes sought Emily. She had frozen mid-step, her bouquet tilted, white petals tumbling like snow onto the aisle. Her lips parted, but no words came. The horror in her eyes cut me deeper than the fall itself. The laughter died slowly, like a fire starved of air. Some guests shifted in their seats, embarrassed not for me, but for themselves, ashamed that they had laughed. I braced my palm against the slick marble, my other hand gripping the tablecloth for leverage. The strain in my shoulder throbbed, but pain was nothing new to me. I rose, slow and deliberate, because a man who has endured cannot be rushed. My back straightened, my chin lifted, and though I had been brought down to the floor, I refused to stay there. Then it happened. The sharp, steady sound of boots crossing marble. Not polished shoes, not rehearsed steps, but boots. Their weight carried authority, a rhythm that did not belong to a ballroom, but to a battlefield. The groom's father had arrived late, his presence commanding attention the moment he entered. His suit was finely cut, his tie slightly askew, but his shoulders were squared, his posture disciplined. He moved with the bearing of a man who had seen real conflict. And when his eyes found me, he froze. His face lost its color as though he had seen a ghost rise before him. His lips parted, trembling with words he barely managed to form. "Sir, is that you?" The hall stilled again. Conversations halted. Forks paused mid-air. The quartet lowered their bows. The words carried more weight than a shout, slicing through the heavy air. Heads turned toward him, then back to me. The guests leaned forward, confusion etched into their faces. Emily's eyes darted between us, her mouth still open, her breath shallow, as if she had stumbled into a story she did not know she was part of. I stood tall, my chest rising slowly with breath. I did not answer. I did not need to. The recognition in his voice, the tremor in his stance, told everyone that there was history between us. Something larger than champagne, larger than marble floors and flower arches. His question was not only for me. It was for the room, for the world that thought it was witnessing a simple wedding. Ryan, still standing smugly beside me, faltered. The curl of disdain on his lips flickered as uncertainty crept into his eyes. He looked from his father to me, confusion shading into unease. The laughter that had filled his mouth moments earlier had dried, leaving him hollow in front of his own guests. The boots carried the groom's father closer, each step echoing, each one pulling the guests tighter into silence. His gaze never left mine. And though I had not seen him in decades, though time had drawn lines across his face and grayed his temples, I knew him the moment he spoke. His voice cracked with emotion, but it was steady enough to shatter the illusion that this was just another wedding. "Sir, is that truly you?" The room seemed to tilt, the chandeliers above swaying in my blurred vision. The marble floor, the whispering guests, Emily's pale face, all of it blurred against the weight of his words. My throat tightened. The years collapsed, and I was no longer simply a father standing at his daughter's wedding. I was a soldier again, a man who had carried another through fire when the night was torn by gunfire. The recognition in his eyes told me the past had returned, uninvited but undeniable. I steadied myself, brushing off the sleeve of my jacket as if dignity could be restored by the simple act of standing tall. My legs ached, but I planted them firmly. Around me, the air grew heavy, as though every person in that hall understood something had shifted. This was no longer Ryan's stage. It was something far greater. Emily's bouquet slipped from her hand, roses scattering across the floor. Her breath came uneven, her gaze wide and searching. The music had died, the laughter had withered, and even the chandeliers seemed to dim. Ryan's father stood only feet away now, his voice softer but no less commanding. "My God, it is you." And at that moment, before 100 guests, before my daughter, before the very man who had tried to humiliate me, the past I had buried cracked open, flooding the room with a silence so deep it could break stone. That silence clung to me even after the ceremony lurched forward, desperate to continue as though nothing had happened. The officiant cleared his throat, his voice faltering as he tried to guide the couple toward their vows. But the weight of recognition still hung between me and Colonel Mitchell. I sat down slowly in the chair I'd righted myself, my bones aching but my mind elsewhere. The room faded, the clink of glasses and the soft music slipping into the background as my thoughts pulled me backward in time. That is what happens when humiliation burns so deep. It awakens every memory that shaped you, every vow that defines you. I remembered the years after Maria passed. Emily was 6 years old when cancer took her mother, and in that moment, the world became smaller and heavier all at once. People told me a little girl needed a mother, that I should remarry quickly. But I knew what Emily needed most was not another stranger in the house, not a replacement who could never be Maria. What she needed was stability, the unshakable assurance that her father would be there, no matter what the storm outside looked like. I worked long hours in the carpentry shop, sanding cabinets until my hands bled, and taking every extra job that came my way. Money was tight. Every dollar was stretched between groceries, school clothes, and the mortgage. There were nights I collapsed into the chair in the corner of our living room, my hands trembling from exhaustion, only for Emily's small footsteps to patter across the floor. She would climb onto my lap without asking, place her tiny hand over mine, and whisper, "You smell like sawdust, Dad." To anyone else, it might have sounded like an insult. But to her, it was comfort. To her, it was the smell of home. The memory that returned strongest was the day I built her a rocking chair. She wanted a place in my workshop, a seat beside me where she could belong. I took the last scraps of oak from a job I had finished and spent 3 nights in the shop shaping, sanding, and carving until my back ached. I painted it a deep blue because it was the only paint I had left from patching the porch. When I brought it inside, Emily's eyes lit up brighter than I had ever seen them. She climbed into that chair and rocked herself gently, her little legs dangling. From then on, every time I worked in the shop, she sat in that chair, handing me tools that were too heavy for her, asking questions about each sound and each nail. That chair held her through scraped knees, piano recitals, and long nights when grief threatened to crush us both. It was in that chair she sat the night Maria died, her small fingers gripping mine so tightly I thought they would never let go. Those memories pressed on me like weights as I sat in the wedding hall, forced to endure the sight of my daughter marrying a man who believed he could humiliate me for sport. My shoulders still burned from the fall, but the ache was nothing compared to the fire crawling under my skin. I remembered the night Maria made me promise. Her voice weak but firm, her hand shaking in mine. "David, protect her. No matter what comes, protect her." I swore it to her then, and I carried that vow into every day since. Every nail I drove into wood, every double shift I worked, every time I put myself last. It was all part of keeping that promise. The hall around me blurred. Guests leaned close to each other, whispering in confusion about the scene they had witnessed. Ryan strutted at the head table, his smug smile returning in fragments, though it wavered when his father's eyes lingered on me. Emily glanced toward me again and again, her bouquet of roses trembling in her hands. Her lips quivered as though she wanted to speak, to stop everything, but she stayed silent, caught in the web of love and shame. I looked at her and gave the smallest nod, the same nod I had given when she was a child and had fallen from her bicycle, scraped and bleeding. Back then, that nod told her she could get up, that she was stronger than she thought. Now it told her the same, though the wound this time was not on her skin, but on her heart. The officiant's voice droned on, words spilling as if they could mend what had already been broken. I heard little of it. My ears were filled instead with the echo of Maria's voice, urging me never to let the world crush our daughter. That echo was louder than the music, stronger than the laughter that had mocked me. It was the vow I lived by, the vow that would shape everything that came next. The week after the wedding ceremony, Emily called me with a brightness in her voice that carried strain underneath. She wanted me to join her and Ryan for dinner in the city. Her tone told me it was more his idea than hers, the words carefully arranged, almost rehearsed. "Dad, he thinks it will be good for the three of us to sit down together, to get to know each other better." I knew what that meant. It meant Ryan wanted to establish himself not just as my daughter's husband-to-be, but as the man in control of her life, and by extension, mine. I agreed anyway. When your daughter asks, you say yes. That evening, I pulled my one good suit from the closet. Navy blue, worn thin at the elbows, but pressed and clean. I had worn it to Emily's high school graduation, then again at her college ceremony, and most recently at the wedding where Ryan had humiliated me. I straightened the tie with fingers stiff from years of carpentry, ran a cloth over my shoes, and told myself that dignity was not measured in fabric. The restaurant Ryan had chosen was in downtown Chicago, a place I had never stepped into before. From the outside, its golden light spilled across Michigan Avenue like something out of a dream. The windows gleamed, and the people entering wore tailored suits and dresses like armor. A doorman in white gloves opened the door with a smile that carried a trace of judgment when his eyes slid over me. Inside, the chandeliers glittered, and the marble floors reflected everything above them. The air smelled faintly of wine and truffle, scents that belonged to a world far from mine. Emily waved from a corner booth, her smile wide and nervous. She rose quickly, kissing my cheek and squeezing my hand, a gesture both welcoming and protective. Beside her, Ryan remained seated until the last possible moment. When he did rise, it was slow, calculated, like a man rehearsing a part he wanted the audience to admire. He extended his hand. "Mr. Carter." His grip was limp, his palm cool, held just long enough to avoid rudeness. "Ryan," I said simply. We sat. Emily kept her hand on mine a moment longer before letting go, her fingers trailing as though reluctant to leave me alone at the table with him. Ryan waved a waiter over before any of us could glance at menus. The Bordeaux, 2009, bottle service. He did not ask if we wanted wine. He told. The waiter nodded, and the bottle appeared moments later, cradled as if it were gold. The small talk began politely enough. Emily carried most of it, her voice light and hopeful, filling in silences before they grew too heavy. She asked about my week at the wood shop, mentioned how Ryan had been working late at his office. I nodded where I needed to, smiled faintly when she looked at me for reassurance. Ryan stayed quiet until the wine had been poured, then leaned back in his seat, fingers steepled, his eyes studying me the way a banker studies a ledger. "So, Mr. Carter," he began, his voice smooth, practiced. "Emily tells me you build furniture. That must be satisfying, working with your hands, fixing things." "I am a carpenter," I said. "I build and repair what is broken." "How refreshing," he replied, the corners of his mouth curling. "I am in financial services, portfolio management, high-risk investments, entirely different world." "Different does not mean better," I answered calmly. Emily laughed nervously, reaching across to squeeze my hand again, as though to remind me to be patient. Ryan sipped his wine, the smile on his lips as sharp as glass. The waiter returned with menus, but Ryan waved him away. "Not yet. Let us enjoy the wine." He turned back to me. "Emily also mentioned you live in the suburbs. Authentic, I imagine. Very working class. I suppose there is a sense of community there, though limited opportunities." I set my glass down carefully, watching him. "What limitations?" "Oh, nothing specific," he said, his grin widening. "Just that once you experience certain standards, It is difficult to appreciate simpler pleasures, but that is generational, I suppose. Emily's face flushed. Dad appreciates nice things too. Of course he does. Ryan cut in smoothly. Different perspectives, that is all. His gaze sharpened. Tell me, Mr. Carter, what do you consider your greatest achievement? The question was a trap. If I answered with pride, he would diminish it. If I spoke humbly, he would twist it into small ambition. I paused, letting silence stretch, then said evenly, raising Emily. Admirable. Ryan replied with a nod, though his eyes betrayed calculation. Single parenthood must have been challenging. Limited resources, I imagine. No wonder Emily appreciates having someone who can provide properly for her future. Emily stiffened. Ryan. He raised a hand gently, cutting her off. I am acknowledging your father's sacrifices. And now those days are over. She deserves the finer things. Do you not agree, Mr. Carter? My jaw tightened. I believe in respect above all else. Respect? Ryan raised an eyebrow. I thought I was being respectful. After all, I am allowing you to maintain tradition. His voice lowered, smooth as oil. Some men in my position would insist on modern arrangements. But I understand the importance of letting older generations feel useful. Emily's glass trembled in her hand. Please stop. Stop what, darling? I am only having an honest conversation with your father. The waiter returned with plates arranged like art, portions so small they looked like decoration. I cut into mine slowly, chewing without tasting, my attention fixed on the man across from me. Ryan spoke again between mouthfuls, his voice casual but laced with arrogance. Tradition matters, after all. That is why, of course, the bride's father pays. He signaled the waiter, who slid the leather folder onto the table by Ryan's elbow. Ryan opened it, feigned surprise at the number, and then slid it across the table toward me, with a smirk. It is custom, Mr. Carter. A father shows his support by covering dinner. Surely you know that. The number glared up at me. $347, more than a week's groceries. Emily's face drained of color. Ryan, that is not necessary. Nonsense, sweetheart. Your father wants to show his support. Do you not, Mr. Carter? The silence stretched taut as wire. I reached for my wallet slowly, the old leather worn smooth by years of use. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of dignity pressing against pride. I placed my card on the folder and closed it gently. It is fine, Emily. Ryan leaned back, triumphant. Excellent. The waiter returned moments later with a receipt. I signed it carefully, each stroke of the pen a battle I refused to lose. The tip stung, but I gave it anyway, because sometimes dignity costs more than money. Thank you for dinner, Ryan said brightly, as though he had done me a favor. I am sure Emily appreciates seeing how well her two favorite men get along. His words were smooth, but his eyes were sharp, savoring the humiliation he thought he had orchestrated. Emily's eyes glistened with shame and anger, but she said nothing. Her silence hurt worse than the bill. I rose slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor, the sound louder than it should have been. I placed my jacket over my arm, nodded once to my daughter, and walked toward the exit. Outside, the city night was sharp and unforgiving. Neon lights reflected off the wet pavement, the air heavy with the roar of traffic. Each step I took down Michigan Avenue carried both humiliation and resolve. Ryan thought he had won, that he had proven himself superior. But men like him always mistake silence for surrender. I knew better. I had lived longer. I had endured worse. And as I walked into the night, I knew this was only the beginning. The days after that dinner stretched long, heavy with silence. Emily called me once, her voice tight, asking if I was angry. I told her no, that I had endured worse. She wanted to believe me, but I could hear doubt under her words, the same doubt I saw in her eyes at the restaurant. She was trying to hold her world together, trying to keep me and Ryan from tearing it apart. I let her speak, let her fill the space with reassurances that sounded more like questions, and I gave her nothing but calm answers. Inside, though, I could feel the fire building. It was 3 nights later when the pounding came at my door. Not a knock, a pounding. Heavy fists slamming against the wood so hard the frame rattled. I was sitting in my living room with the lamp just turned off, the old house creaking as it settled into its night rhythms. Visitors did not come unannounced in my neighborhood, not at that hour. My first thought was trouble. My second was Ryan. The porch light flicked on with the motion sensor, catching a shadow outside. Through the glass, I saw him, his expensive coat gleaming in the light, his perfect hair now disheveled, his face twisted into something rawer than the polished charm he usually wore. I opened the door slowly, deliberately. He did not wait for an invitation. He shoved past me, the scent of cologne mixed with city smoke trailing behind him. His shoes struck the hardwood like gunfire. He spun in the center of my living room, his eyes darting over the modest furniture, the family photographs on the wall, the mantel where Maria's picture stood in her wedding dress. He sneered. "We need to talk." I closed the door quietly behind him. "About what?" "Do not play dumb with me," he snapped, his voice sharper than it needed to be, volume rising as if loudness could disguise the crack in his confidence. Emily has been different since that dinner. She's asking questions, she's doubting me, and I know where it is coming from. I leaned against the door frame, my arms crossed, steady as stone. If she is asking questions, perhaps she deserves answers. His head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing. "You told her things. You poisoned her against me." "I told her nothing but what I observed," I said evenly. "If she sees truth in it, that is not poison. That is clarity." His laugh was brittle, a sound without warmth. "Right. The concerned father act. Very touching." He stepped closer, trying to use his height like a weapon. But I had stood against men who carried rifles and grenades. His stance was theater. "Here is what you are going to do," he continued, his finger jabbing the air between us. "Tomorrow you are going to call her. You are going to apologize. You will tell her you were wrong about me, that you overreacted. You will fix this, or you will lose her permanently." I held his gaze without blinking. "Or what?" The question hung in the air, heavy as iron. His face flushed red, the polish cracking away to reveal desperation beneath. "Or you will find out what it is like to lose her forever." The words were raw, almost a plea disguised as a threat. For a moment, silence filled the room, thicker than his anger. I studied him, the way his jaw clenched, the way his hands shook slightly at his sides. This was not the confidence of a man in control. This was fear, dressed in arrogance. This was a boy who had never been told no, now facing the possibility of rejection. "Young man," I said quietly, "I think you are forgetting yourself." His eyes flashed, and he pulled his phone from his pocket, waving it like a weapon. "One call, one text. That is all it takes. I tell her you threatened me, that you are jealous, trying to break us apart. Who do you think she will believe? Her fiancé or her bitter old father?" I did not move. I did not raise my voice. But I shifted my stance just enough to let him feel it. Not aggression, Steadiness. The kind of steadiness that comes from carrying a man through fire with bullets slicing the air around you. The kind of steadiness that men like Ryan could never fake. For the first time since he barged through my door, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "You do not understand," he muttered, his voice cracking. "I have worked too hard to get here. I will not let some carpenter ruin everything I built." I looked around my modest living room. The worn couch, the dining table where Emily had once spread her homework while I made spaghetti. The photo of Maria smiling from the mantel. Then I looked back at him. "What exactly have you built?" I asked. "Success? Money? A future?" He gestured at the room, as if it were evidence in a trial. "Things you would not understand. Real achievement. Not this." I stepped closer, just enough for my voice to land with weight. "This is a daughter who knows she is loved unconditionally. This is bedtime stories, scraped knees, piano recitals, and tuition paid in overtime hours. This is what achievement looks like." His lip curled, but his voice lacked its earlier sharpness. "Sentimental garbage. The world does not run on bedtime stories, old man. It runs on power, money, and knowing how to use both." "Maybe your world does," I replied, calm as stone. "But Emily comes from a different one." Sweat broke across his forehead despite the cool air drifting through the window. His collar clung to his neck. His fists clenched and unclenched as if he wanted to strike me, but something held him back. Maybe it was the way I stood. Maybe it was instinct warning him that he was out of his depth. "She will choose me," he said at last. But his words were thin, more plea than declaration. "When it comes down to it, she will choose the life I can give her." I tilted my head slightly. "Will she?" The question landed like a stone in water, ripples spreading through the silence. For a moment I thought he might swing. His body tensed, every muscle coiled. But then he faltered. He looked at me one last time, his eyes wild. "This is not over. Emily is mine. She chose me, not you." I stepped forward until only inches separated us, my voice low and steady. "Emily is not property. She does not belong to anyone." He spun, stormed to the door, and threw it open. Before he left, he looked back, his face twisted in frustration. "You have no idea who you are dealing with." "Actually," I said softly, "I think I do." The door slammed behind him. His car engine roared down the street, fading into the distance. The house fell silent again, the kind of silence that comes after a storm. I walked to the mantel and looked at Maria's photograph. Her smile was steady, her eyes filled with a faith that had carried me through years of loss and struggle. I reached under my shirt and pulled the chain with her ring into the open, the gold warm against my palm. "Maria," I whispered. I promised. The house remained silent long after Ryan's car engine faded down the block, but the echo of his threats clung to the air like smoke. I sat in the old armchair by the window, staring at the porch light flickering against the night. Promises are heavy things. They anchor you when storms rage, but they also weigh on you when you're tired. I rubbed Maria's ring between my fingers, its warmth steady, reminding me that vows are not broken by fear or by arrogance. They are tested, and they are kept. The next afternoon, Emily stopped by the house. She always came unannounced, just as she had since she was a child. I heard her voice before I saw her, light and familiar, carrying through the clatter of tools in my wood shop. "Dad, are you in here?" I stepped out from behind the workbench, wiping sawdust from my hands. Emily stood in the doorway, still in her work clothes, her hair tied back loosely, strands falling across her face. Her eyes were tired, but when she smiled at me, I saw Maria in her features. She crossed the room and hugged me, pressing her cheek against my shoulder the way she used to when she was small. I held her close, inhaling the faint scent of her perfume, the same one her mother once wore. "You missed more of the reception after the ceremony," she said softly, her voice carrying both accusation and concern. "People noticed." I shrugged. "Crowds are not for me." She pulled back, searching my face. "You're not angry, are you?" I shook my head. "Emily, I have been through worse." But she looked unconvinced. Her eyes darted away, her hands twisting together in front of her, the way they always did when she was holding back words. Finally, she whispered, "Ryan has been nervous. That is all. He does not always know how to act around people. He was trying too hard." My hands moved to her shoulders, firm but gentle. "Emily," I said, my voice low and steady. "Was he nervous? Or was he testing us?" Her eyes widened, the question landing somewhere deep. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her breath caught, and I could see her falter. I did not push. I did not need to. Sometimes, the seed of doubt is enough. We stood there in silence, the hum of the refrigerator in the corner filling the space. Then she hugged me again, tighter this time. "I love you, Dad." I kissed the top of her head. "I love you too, Princess. Always." When she left, the shop felt heavier, the air thicker with the weight of unspoken truths. But I knew what I had needed to do was done. A question had been planted, one she could not unhear. Questions are powerful things. They grow in silence, sprout in uncertainty, and when the right moment comes, they break through everything that tried to cover them. Days passed. Emily called me less, but when she did, her voice carried strain. She sounded like someone wrestling with shadows, not yet ready to bring them into the light. I did not press her. I had learned long ago that forcing someone to see the truth too quickly only made them turn away. Instead, I waited, silent but steady, knowing the cracks would widen on their own. The whispers began small. I was at the hardware store picking up sandpaper when an old neighbor pulled me aside, his voice low. "David, I heard something downtown. Your daughter's fiancé was bragging, talking about moving her out of the suburbs, saying she would never come back once they were married." He laughed like it was nothing, like trading in an old truck for a new one. I said nothing, only nodded, but the words sank into me like nails. Later that week, at the bakery where I bought bread each Saturday, Mrs. Rodriguez leaned across the counter, her hands trembling slightly. I should not say this, but I overheard something at the cafe near Emily's office. That young man, he said this neighborhood was something you grow out of. Said it with a smirk. I thanked her quietly, left a larger tip than usual, and walked home with the weight of her words pressing on me. Each whisper chipped away at the picture Emily was painting for herself. She wanted to believe Ryan was ambitious, charming, forward-looking. But ambition without respect becomes arrogance, and arrogance always reveals itself sooner or later. I tried not to let the whispers consume me, but they followed me like shadows. I found myself spending longer hours in the wood shop, planing boards until the surface gleamed. Even when there was no project waiting, my hands needed motion, needed wood under my fingers to keep them from curling into fists at the thought of Ryan. When I was not in the shop, I sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the rows of houses, listening to the laughter of children playing in the street. Honest laughter, untainted by cruelty. It reminded me of Emily's childhood, of Maria's soft voice calling us in for dinner, of nights when family meant warmth and safety, not humiliation and threats. One evening, as the light faded and the sky turned the color of old copper, my neighbor Tom joined me on the porch. He lowered himself into the chair beside mine, a man with lines on his face carved by both age and war. We had never spoken much about Vietnam, though we both knew the weight the other carried. He stared into his coffee for a long time before speaking. "People are talking, David," he said finally, his voice low. Not in a good way. I turned to him. "What do you mean?" He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding mine. "Word is, Ryan called Emily an acquisition, like a business deal, like something he bought, not someone he loves." The word hit me like a hammer. Acquisition. Cold, calculated, stripped of humanity. Not a word for a woman, for my daughter. I clenched my jaw, the muscles tight enough to ache, and nodded. "Understood," I said quietly. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the clock struck midnight, the house creaking around me. I turned the word over in my mind again and again. Acquisition. It was worse than disrespect. It was possession. It was control disguised as love. The next day confirmed what I feared. I had driven into the city to pick up supplies, parking my truck near one of the tall glass towers where Ryan worked. As I sat waiting for a loading zone to clear, I saw him on the sidewalk, phone pressed to his ear, his other hand waving dismissively as though the world itself was an inconvenience. I rolled my window down slightly, not meaning to eavesdrop, but his voice carried sharp and confident. "No, trust me," he was saying. "She is perfect, sweet, trusting. And her father? Simple. Exactly the kind of man who will not interfere. She is an acquisition. A step, that is all." My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles went white. The light changed, horns blared behind me, but I did not move. Acquisition. He hung up, adjusted his cufflinks, and disappeared into the building. I sat there, heart pounding, the word echoing in my chest, louder than the city around me. When I finally pulled away, the streets blurred past, my thoughts louder than the engine. Back home, I went straight to the shop. The half-finished rocking chair I had been building for a neighbor's child sat waiting. I picked up a chisel and set to work, the rhythm of wood and steel steadying me. But even as I carved, the word echoed, acquisition. That evening, Emily stopped by again. She walked into the shop quietly, her footsteps light against the sawdust-covered floor. "Dad?" she called softly. I looked up from the workbench. "In here, Princess." She stepped closer, her eyes searching mine. She looked tired, more tired than she should have at her age. "You do not like him," she said. Not a question, but a statement. I set the chisel down, wiped my hands on a rag, and faced her. "Emily, I do not have to like him, but you have to see him clearly." She bit her lip, her hands twisting again. Sometimes I wonder if I am blind." I stepped closer, placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Love is not blind. Love just chooses to see the best. That is not weakness. That is strength. But ask yourself, does he show you the best? Or does he test how much you will endure?" Her eyes filled, glistening in the light of the workshop lamp. She whispered, "What if I made a mistake?" I squeezed her shoulder gently. "Then you learn. Mistakes do not define you. How you respond to them does." She leaned into me, her forehead against my chest, her voice breaking. "I do not want to believe it, Dad. I do not want to believe I was wrong." I stroked her hair, the way I had when she was small, and whispered the only truth I knew. "You are not alone. You will never be alone." Those words stayed with me long after Emily left the shop that night. The sound of her footsteps fading down the driveway was like a wound reopening, because I could hear the weight she carried in them. She was torn between loyalty to the man she loved and the truth she was beginning to see. And I knew that kind of battle left scars. I sat at the workbench, Maria's photograph on the wall above me, and whispered into the stillness. She is breaking, Maria. I can feel it. But she needs more than my doubts. She needs proof. Days blurred together after that. I worked longer hours, not because I needed the money, but because the rhythm of my hands on wood kept me steady. The rocking chair for the neighbor's child was finished, sanded to a smooth shine, painted a deep blue. I ran my palm along its backrest, remembering Emily's chair all those years ago, the way she had sat swinging her legs, asking questions about tools she could not yet lift. That memory steadied me, but it also sharpened the ache. I had protected her then. I needed to protect her now. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself walking through the quiet streets of our neighborhood. The air smelled of rain on asphalt, the lamps throwing yellow circles onto the wet pavement. I passed the bar on the corner, its neon sign buzzing faintly, and through the open door I saw a familiar face. I stopped, blinking to make sure my eyes were not deceiving me. At the counter sat Sam Dalton. Sam and I had served together nearly 30 years ago. Back then, he was the one who kept calm when everything went to hell, the steady voice in the middle of chaos. After the war, we lost touch. But I had heard whispers that he became a lawyer, not one of the flashy types, but a quiet one who built cases carefully and let the truth do the heavy lifting. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The bar smelled of whiskey and wood polish, the low hum of conversation filling the room. Sam looked up, his eyes narrowing in recognition. Then he grinned, the same grin I remembered from the barracks. David Carter? Well, I'll be damned. I slid onto the stool beside him. It has been a long time. Too long, he said, studying my face, the lines, the gray in my hair. You look like a man carrying more than your share. I chuckled without humor. You are not wrong. The bartender set a coffee in front of me without asking, and I wrapped my hands around it, letting the heat soak into my tired fingers. Sam leaned closer. Talk to me. So I did. I told him about Ryan, about the chair at the wedding, about the dinner at the restaurant and the bills slid across the table, about the night he pounded at my door, threats spilling from his mouth, about the whispers, the word acquisition repeated like a curse. Sam listened without interrupting, his lawyer's mind storing details, his soldier's heart understanding what I left unsaid. When I finished, he sat back, exhaling slowly. You do not fight fire with fire, David. You let it burn itself out. I frowned. Meaning? Men like him thrive on reaction, Sam said, his voice low and deliberate. You shout, you curse, you swing, you lose. What you do is stand still, patient. You let his own arrogance consume him. It always does. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness steadying me. Patience I could manage. I had survived war, grief, and decades of long nights in the shop. But watching Emily walk into a trap while I stood still felt like surrender. Sam seemed to read my thoughts. I am not saying do nothing, he added. I am saying do it smart. You do not swing fists anymore. You gather facts. You prepare. And when the time comes, you let the truth speak for itself. I nodded slowly. And if she does not see it until it is too late? Then you catch her when she falls, Sam said quietly. Silence settled between us, filled by the clink of glasses and the low murmur of other patrons. I stared at my hands on the counter, scarred and calloused, the same hands that had built Emily's childhood, that had carried her through every storm. Could they hold her through this one too? Sam broke the silence. There is something else you should know. His tone sharpened, the lawyer replacing the friend. A few months back, I handled a case involving a financial firm downtown. Guess whose name came up? I did not answer. Ryan Mitchell, he said flatly. The name hit me like a hammer. He was involved in a deal that nearly cost the firm millions, Sam continued. Shady investments, bending rules until they almost snapped. They buried it to protect the company's image. But inside the industry, people know his reputation is not as clean as he makes it seem. Reckless, arrogant, dangerous. I let the information sink in, heavy as stone. Emily did not know. Of course she did not. Men like Ryan never show their cracks until it is too late. You are telling me he is not just arrogant. He is reckless. Sam nodded. And men like that always leave a trail. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sharp edge of something that was not rage or despair, but strategy. You still have that instinct, Sam said, smiling faintly. The one that reads terrain. Do not lose it now. I looked at him. Really looked. His eyes were the same as they had been all those years ago. Steady under fire. Steady now. I will not, I said. We clinked glasses. His bourbon, my coffee. A soldier's toast in civilian clothes. When I left the bar, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the streetlights, puddles reflecting bits of neon. I walked home slowly, Sam's words echoing in my mind. Patience, strategy, truth. At the house, I hung my coat, sat in the living room, and stared at Maria's picture. I told her softly, I have an ally now. The next morning I called Emily. She answered quickly, her voice bright but tired. Dad. Hi, Princess. I just wanted to check in. She hesitated. Ryan says you do not like him. I smiled faintly. That is not news. She sighed. Dad, he is trying. Is he? I asked quietly. Or is he performing? Silence stretched on the line. I could hear her breathing, uneven, like someone carrying too much weight. I will think about it, she said finally. That is all I ask, I told her. We hung up, and I sat there with the phone still in my hand, knowing the cracks were widening. She was beginning to see what I had seen all along, that Ryan was not building a future with her. He was building a future on her. That night, I wrote down everything Sam had told me. Names, dates, the hint of scandal. I locked the paper in a tin box in the shop, not to use yet, but to keep safe, like ammunition stored for the right moment. The rocking chair stood beside me, finished and gleaming, a reminder of promises kept. I touched the smooth wood and whispered, We are not done fighting yet. Outside, the neighborhood settled into sleep. Inside, the clock ticked on, each second marking the countdown toward the wedding day. For the first time, I did not feel alone. I had an ally, and I had the truth waiting like a blade in the dark. The morning of Emily's wedding broke clear and sharp, the kind of spring day where the air feels scrubbed clean, as if nature itself is preparing for something monumental. I had not slept. My body was tired, but my mind carried the weight of promises and the steady tick of the clock counting down to this moment. I pressed the navy suit one last time, smoothing the seams worn thin from years of service at graduations, ceremonies, and dinners that always seemed to test me. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I saw a man of 58 years, lines cut deep into his face. Hair more gray than brown, but eyes steady. I fastened the chain around my neck, Maria's ring warm against my chest, and whispered to her photograph, "I am keeping my promise." By noon, I was standing outside the venue Ryan's family had chosen, a sprawling estate called the Rosewood Hall. White chairs lined the manicured lawn, flower arches heavy with blossoms, champagne glasses glinting in the sunlight. Guests in tailored suits and dresses clustered in groups, their conversations a careful dance of money and appearances. I kept to the edges, watching. Men like Ryan thrived in places like this. Men like me walked them like ghosts. Then I saw her. Emily appeared at the head of the aisle, radiant in the altered dress that had once belonged to Maria. My throat tightened. The lace of her mother's gown and the light in her eyes merged past and present into one vision of beauty. When the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman?" I rose and said proudly, "I do." My chest ached as if something had been carved from me, but I stood tall because promises are not kept by slouching. The vows were spoken. The kiss was shared. Polite applause followed. Then came the reception inside the grand hall, where chandeliers dripped light onto linen-draped tables. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters drifted with trays of wine and hors d'oeuvres. The air smelled of roses and wealth. I found my place card at a table near the back, far from the head table where Ryan basked in the glow of his own family's approval. The placement was no accident. It was meant to keep me distant, insignificant. For a time, I sat quietly, listening to the laughter around me, nodding politely when spoken to, eating little. The food was beautiful, but it might as well have been ash in my mouth. I kept my eyes on Emily, watching her smile, watching her mask crack at the edges whenever Ryan leaned in to whisper something smug. She was fighting herself, clinging to the dream of a life she was beginning to realize might already be a nightmare. It was during the speeches that it happened. I rose to join another table, a cousin waving me over to hear a story about Emily as a child. I reached for my chair to slide it back under me when suddenly it was gone. My body pitched backward, knees buckling, and time slowed. The chatter strangled mid-sentence. The polished floor rushed up to meet me. I hit hard, the crack of bone against marble echoing beneath the chandeliers. For a breathless moment, silence. Then laughter. Cruel, uneven, spilling from the mouths of those who wanted to believe it was a joke, not cruelty. Ryan stood above me, one hand still on the back of the chair he had yanked away. His smile was sharp, his voice loud enough to carry. Oops. Looks like someone is unsteady on his feet. Age catches us all. A few chuckles, gasps from others. But I heard Emily's cry from across the room, sharp and panicked. Ryan leaned closer, his words low but audible to those nearby. Maybe you are more comfortable down there. Your place is on the floor. I stayed down longer than I needed to, not because I was hurt, but because silence has power. Let them feel it, I thought. Let them see what humiliation looks like when it is not masked as humor. My hand braced against the marble, my other gripping the tablecloth. I rose slowly, deliberately. My face calm, my back straight. The way a man rises who has been knocked down more times than he can count and still refuses to stay there. The laughter died. Eyes darted away. People shifted in their seats, ashamed not of me, but of themselves for having laughed. Emily rushed forward, bouquet abandoned, roses scattering across the floor. Her hands grasped my arm, frantic. Dad. I squeezed her hand gently. I am fine, Princess. but her eyes told me she was not. She looked at Ryan as though seeing him clearly for the first time. And then the boots. The sound cut across the hall, steady and purposeful. Not polished shoes, not rehearsed steps. Boots. Military boots. At the entrance stood Colonel Mitchell, Ryan's father. He had arrived late, his tie slightly askew, his suit sharp but worn by the bearing of a soldier who could never shed discipline. His eyes swept the room, landed on me and froze. He stopped dead, his face draining of color. His lips trembled, and he whispered, "Sir, is that you?" The hall stilled. The quartet lowered their bows. The waiters stopped mid-step. All eyes turned to him, then to me. Recognition flashed like lightning across the space between us. "Sir, is that truly you?" His voice cracked, but it carried the weight of history. Emily's eyes darted between us, her breath shallow. Ryan stiffened, confusion spreading across his face. I said nothing. Some truths are not spoken. They are felt. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward, his boots striking the marble like a drumbeat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady now, filling the hall. This man is Sergeant David Carter. In 1991, during Desert Storm, he carried me on his shoulders through gunfire, through fire itself. I was down, bleeding, and he refused to leave me behind. Without him, I would not be standing here today. Gasps rippled through the guests. Murmurs swelled, not of mockery now, but of reverence. Ryan staggered back, his chair clattering to the floor. His face drained, his lips parting, but no words coming. Emily looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears, torn between pride and grief. I stood tall, silent, letting the truth hang heavy in the air. Colonel Mitchell's voice hardened as he turned to his son. "You humiliated the man who saved my life. The very reason you even have a father to stand beside you today. Do you even understand what you have done?" Ryan stammered. "I did not know." "You did not care to know." Mitchell cut in, his words sharp as a blade. The room shifted. The guests leaned forward, whispers rushing through them like fire. Respect, honor, hero. The words replaced the cruel laughter that had filled the hall moments earlier. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm and steady, carrying without effort. Respect is not bought. It is earned. Emily's tears spilled over, but her face shone with certainty for the first time in months. She looked at Ryan, her voice breaking but firm. Love does not humiliate. Love does not tear down. Love builds. Ryan's mask cracked. His voice came out raw, desperate. "Emily, please, I love you." I was afraid I could never measure up, so I tore him down before he could tear me down. But it was too late. The truth had already dismantled him. Emily slipped the ring from her finger, slowly, deliberately, and placed it on the table. The diamond that once sparkled like a promise now looked like broken glass. I choose dignity. I choose truth. I choose the life my parents taught me to honor. Gasps filled the hall. Ryan's mouth opened, but no words followed. His world of control and arrogance crumbled beneath the weight of history and gratitude. Emily walked back to me, slipped her hand into mine, and stood tall at my side. Together, we turned. Colonel Mitchell raised his voice once more. "This man saved my life. Tonight, he saved us all from a lie." The applause began softly, hesitant, then swelled until the hall thundered with it. Guests rose to their feet, clapping not for the wedding, but for the truth. Ryan stood frozen, pale, his arrogance stripped away. Emily held my hand tightly, her voice whispering against the roar. Dad, you kept your promise. I looked up at the chandeliers glittering like stars and whispered back, so did I, Maria. So did I. This is the final line of part 7. I looked up at the chandeliers glittering like stars and whispered back, so did I, Maria. So did I. When the applause faded and the guests slowly began to leave the hall, I stood with Emily at my side, her hand still gripping mine, as though it was the only thing keeping her steady. She had just made the hardest decision of her life, and though her face was pale and her lips trembled, her eyes were clear. She was free. I looked down at her, at the tears still streaking her cheeks, and I saw the little girl who once sat in a rocking chair I built, handing me tools she could barely lift. Now she was a woman, and she had chosen truth over illusion, dignity over comfort. My chest ached, but with pride, not pain. Colonel Mitchell approached us quietly, his boots softer now on the marble floor. His eyes met mine with a weight of gratitude that stretched across decades. He extended his hand, but when I took it, he pulled me into an embrace. His voice was low, rough with emotion. I owe you my life. Tonight, I owe you my son's truth as well. I nodded, unable to speak. Sometimes words are too small for moments like these. Emily leaned into me, whispering, Dad, I thought I would be broken after this, but I feel lighter. I kissed the top of her head, my voice steady. That is what happens when you step away from someone who tries to make you small. You rise. Later that night, back in my quiet house, I sat in the living room with Maria's photograph before me and her ring warm against my palm. The old clock ticked steadily, no longer a countdown, but a rhythm of peace. I spoke softly into the stillness. She is safe, Maria. I kept the promise. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to close my eyes, not with fear of what came next, but with the peace of a man who had fought the battle he was given and walked away with dignity intact. If you like this story, please subscribe and tell us your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next one, click on the box on the screen.